Happy Thursday, everybody. I pray all is well. My name is Michael Gibson, and I'm talking about my favorite subject of why I go to church. I'm calling this "The Season is Changing and the Harvest is Coming." To reiterate one of my main points, we are the church. We are the body. We are members in particular. So we all have the obligation, we all have the duty to spread the gifts and the treasure that God has placed on the inside of us. So it is our responsibility to do our part and spread the good news of the gospel. That's his death, burial, and resurrection, and that Jesus does save the lost if they want to be saved. Every time I wake up, I marvel at the things that God does, because it's in the little things that you can see the Creator God working. It's in the minute details that you really have the opportunity to see the majesty and just how deep the Creator is. We spend our whole life trying to unfold the mystery of who and what God is. And for me, blessings to you, Tiff. To me, I think it's important to sometimes just sit back and appreciate the beauty and the complexity, yet the simplicity of who God is. So I call this the season is changing, because right now we're headed into spring. In the springtime, there's a few things that begin to happen. One, the weather changes. And a lot of times there is a lot of rain that happens before you get the heat. And many of us may complain about the rainy days and we don't see the purpose in the rain. But it is, as the saying goes, April showers bring May flowers. But flowers are not the only things that bloom during this time of year. You also have trees beginning to bud. So if you don't recognize in your life that seasons are changing, then perhaps you will be unprepared. So through the winter, things like the grass, they begin to go dormant, and your grass will turn colors from green to the tan or the brown, whatever hue you want to call it. The grass is not dead, but the grass is dormant. The trees that one may have in their yard will drop their leaves, and all you see are the branches of the trees. And then as time passes, life begins to come back into those trees. Many of us, when it comes to God, we enjoy the harvest, the fruit of the harvest, but we don't want to partake in harvesting those things. I think it's vital. I think it's critical. I think it's fundamental to be a believer in God, that you must understand that there is work involved. So the reason I talked about the changing of the season, because right now, before my grass ever turns green again, I must begin to prepare for the life that is coming back in the grass. So I have paid someone to come and fertilize my yard, because I know the season is changing. Even though it's 30 degrees in the morning, it's 50 degrees in midday, I know the season is changing. And because I know, and I know what this season is going to bring in my life, I begin to prepare for the things that are coming in my life. Many of us are struggling with our next level in life because we are not preparing for the new season. So during this time, even though there was not one leaf on my tree, I have to begin to put fertilization down in the tree. I have to put insecticide in the tree to protect the root of the tree from being damaged by the insects that are coming. What that means is I must know what the tree is to provide the right nourishment and protection for that tree. So even before the leaves even fell off the tree, I actually had to put some preventative maintenance in the tree. Now, because of the winter, because of the snow, because of the ice, because of the lack of sunlight, the edge around my tree, the mulch bed around my tree, it is not intact. Actually, most of the mulch has worn away just because of the change of season. So even though there was mulch placed down last year, one must remulch. Even if you don't have mulch around your tree, one must weed out from beneath your rock bed or whatever you have around your tree. So every spring, when the spring first enters, I must begin to edge around my tree again. Even though I have edged the tree before, I must edge around the tree again. I must edge around the tree again. What God began to place in my spirit, some of us want to have a harvest, and some of us want to reap the rewards of the harvest, but we don't want to edge again. We don't want to work again. We don't want to cut back to things that have overgrown in our life again. Listen, things and obstacles and situations are going to come in your life season after season after season after season. God has promised me a harvest on the tree because it's life. It is living. But God is actually not going to re-edge my tree again. I have to go out there with my spade and my shovel, and I have to edge the tree again. I have to go out there with my rake and rake around all of the weeds and things that have started to grow over the winter that I didn't know that was there because they were dormant. But as the weather starts to spring up, there's a weed called chickweed that is starting to grow in my flower beds. I have to go and start weeding out the things that was lying dormant, the things that I didn't know existed, the problems that I didn't know was there, the situations and stumbling blocks that I didn't realize that would prohibit the growth of the tree. I have to go back and reevaluate and reassess what is around the gift, the fruit that God has given me. In this season of our life, we must begin to be willing to redo some of the work we had to do to get where we are today. Many of us will not have continued success because we don't want to re-edge. We don't want to weed again. We don't want to rake again. We don't want to buy new mulch to beautify the tree that we originally planted. So my question is to you, are you willing to do the work that it takes to maintain the gift, the call, the purpose in your life? Because even though God may have placed a gift inside of you, you are going to have to retool, rework, relook at, get new information, get new nutrients. You actually have to sometimes, because the tree has grown. Because the tree has grown, the circle around the tree, the edge bed, the mulch bed actually grows. As your tree gets bigger, the mulch bed gets higher. So the amount of money, the amount of effort, the amount of work it took when the tree was small now requires more money because you got to get more mulch. You got a bigger circumference. We want God to enlarge our territory. We want God to establish us, but we don't realize that during that establishment process, we actually grow, we actually expand. So we actually got to dig a bigger hole. We got to do more than what we were doing when the tree was little. Now that my tree is bigger, it actually requires more fertilization. I cannot just put the little drop, the 1 gallon of water on the tree. Now that tree, because it is so big, it actually requires 2 gallons of water. So it's actually costing me more money. It's actually costing me more energy. It's actually costing me more labor for the same thing that I planted. So my question is to you, are you willing to put in more work? Are you afraid of your purpose? Are you afraid of your gifting? Are you afraid of your calling that you are actually unwilling to do more work? Because God gave you a gift, and that that gift actually became something. It actually produced fruit. But to produce more fruit, it will actually require you to do more work, because as the tree gets more mature, it takes more fertilization. It actually takes time to now cut back the branches that are no longer sightly, because there are branches that grow in the wrong directions. There will be branches that cross another branch that will cause damage to that branch because of the rubbing, the friction that is happening. Are you willing to allow God to prune away branches that are causing friction, branches that actually will kill something that is alive? Are you willing to prune a branch that is hanging low that now impedes the progress of other people? The season is changing. The question is, are you willing to do the work to allow that tree to grow? Because now that tree is no longer just 3 feet, 4 feet tall. That tree is now 10 and 12 feet tall. And because that tree is taller, that tree requires more maintenance. I have a tree right now in my front yard where a bird actually planted its nest inside the tree because the tree is big enough to house something else. Are you willing to take out the bird nest that grew over the season? See, many of us, greetings, Apostle Bobby, and many of us get a tree growing in our life. Greetings to you, Apostle Pender, as well. Many of us get a tree in our life, and that tree begins to grow. And as that tree begins to mature, as that tree begins to take more work, we no longer want to maintenance that tree, because now the tree is a nuisance. Now the tree has grown up so big that it's actually grown into our neighbor's yards, and we got to cut back the tree. Now the tree is so big and the branches are so thick, it requires a different set of shears to cut a branch. It requires a different set of shears. So the tools that you use to maintain the tree when the tree was just a young sproutling, now that it is a mature tree, the branches are thicker. That means you got to get a new tool. That means you got to get new information. So the word that God gave to sustain you when you just was a young tree, you're going to have to get a different word to sustain you now that you are a bigger tree, because you're going to have bigger obstacles. You're going to have bigger barriers. You're going to have more haters. You're going to have more people now hanging around you, because the tree, when it was just a seedling, it didn't really provide any covering. It didn't really provide any shade. But now that the tree has matured, now you have people that actually want to hang underneath the tree. So if people are going to hang underneath the tree, you got to be willing to be pruned, to cut those low-lying branches so that they won't interfere with the people that want to hang underneath the tree. My question is to you: are you ready for the change in season? Are you ready to allow God to prune off some of those low-hanging branches, because now people are attracted to you, people want to hang around you, people want to be with you? But guess what? In order to provide the proper covering, God has to do some pruning. Every season, God will continue to prune, because some of your branches are too low. God is asking you to come up higher so that you could be more of a covering, but you are unwilling to come up higher. You are unwilling to be pruned. You are unwilling to be trimmed. You are unwilling to allow the root ball to grow, because like I stated before, when the tree gets bigger, the root gets bigger. That means you got to put a bigger mulch bed. So that means not only do you got to provide more mulch around the tree, it's cost you more money. So there's a passage of scripture that says the harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. What God is reminding me, you've done all of this work, but are you willing to harvest? Because truth be told, seeding the plant is the easy part. Watering the plant is a little difficult, but the harvesting is much more work, because when those tomato plants grow a harvest, guess what? The fruit is coming out every single day. You got to go out there in the morning sometime and get some tomatoes. Then in the evening, you got to get some tomatoes. And then you got to protect from the weeds and the bugs and the animals that's trying to eat the fruit. It takes a lot of work to harvest that tomato plant. But my question to you: are you prepared for the harvest? So many of us ask God to bless us, but when the seasons change and the maintenance that is required for us to be a more profitable fruit, and I choose the word profitable because God doesn't give you a gift and does not expect a more profitable return. That means he wants a return on his investment. So the gifts and talents that God has placed in you, my question is, what have you done to further your gift and talents during the off season? Are you even aware that the season has changed and now it is time for you to produce fruit? Do you even recognize that you are no longer able to be dormant like you was? This is actually the season of life. Do you even recognize that there's a lost and hurting generation of people that is looking for someone to be a covering to them? Are you positioning yourself to be a covering to them? Or are you still in the same mindset that this is still the winter time and it is not my time to grow? I want you to know that God is saying that the season has changed. And if you are a believer of God, you got to go from that sproutling to a mature tree. But the only way for you to become a mature tree, you must allow the pruning process to happen. The trees that got damaged because of the storms, the leaves that got damaged because of the wind that came, the leaves that got damaged because of the ice that came, you got to be willing to cut those branches off because those branches are not bearing any more fruit. Are you allowing God to cut out and root out and prune out the areas that are no longer bearing fruit so that you can actually produce more fruit? Are you willing to put in the work that it takes to re-edge the plant? Every year my tree takes maintenance. Every single year I have to re-edge. So what was right before or look right will no longer look right because the tree is grown. It takes more work. It takes me going out there to recognize that the season is changing. So my question to you, do you recognize that the season has changed and that God is actually wanting to re-edge your life? God is actually looking to perfect you. God is actually taking away the things that is growing on the root. Everything that happens to your life is not always the devil. It's not. Stop blaming everything on the devil. Some things is required maintenance for you to mature. As a child, you do not stay on your mother's breast milk your whole life. The reason is that breast milk was only designed to take you to a certain stage of your life. And after that stage in your life, you actually have to eat more nutrients. You have to eat different type of food to gain the nutrients you need. God is saying, at what point do you get off of the milk of the word and begin to partake in the meat of the word so that you can actually mature enough to be a tree that can actually become a covering for someone else? You can never become a mature tree without more nutrients. You can never become a good apple tree without more nutrients. It will never happen. You would never become a mature cherry tree without more nutrients. So how do you expect to become a more mature believer in God if you're still on the ABCs and fundamental of who God is? If you're confused about who God is, if you're confused about what the gospel is, if you're confused about who you should be calling on, if you're confused about all that other stuff, how can you be a covering for somebody? My maple tree, when I planted it, is now a covering for me. I am now able to sit underneath that tree with my nice little bench and be in the shade and be covered. But guess what? That tree didn't get where it was on its own. When the season began to change, I gotta take out those undesirable branches, because sometimes the maple tree, it drops little seedlings, and what happens is other little branches begin to grow up next to the main trunk. I only want one trunk. There can only be one true vine in our lives. We cannot be having these 50 million doctrines saying that this is God. There's only one way to God. There is only one main branch. There is only one main trunk. And if you are not grafted into that trunk, if you are not grafted into the main branch, you will not survive. The only way that you can survive in this world today, and I promise you that's if you're grafted into the true vine, the tree of life, the thing that actually produces something. You got to get grafted in. But the question is, are you willing to harvest the gift that God had for you? Because like I said before, the harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. When you begin to bear fruit, that's when the work just begins. When you begin to actually bear fruit, you do not stop tending the garden. The work is just beginning. Many of us are falling away by the wayside when our work has just begun. The season of sitting on the sideline is no longer. The season of being ashamed of who God is and what God is in your life and what God has called you to do has passed. That season is past. Your work has just begun. You've toiled too many nights to stop now. You've come too far to give up. You must reap the harvest of the work that you have done. But when you reap the harvest, you might have to buy bigger baskets. You actually might have to make more space in your storage area. You might actually have to buy a new barn. What does all of that mean? It means you might have to invest more time, energy, and money into the thing that God is giving you. See, we want the blessings from God, but we don't want to prepare for the blessings. We don't want a bigger barn. We don't want to have to move out of the place that we are in. God's blessings will overtake you, but that blessing that overtakes you will require you to expand. That blessing that overtakes you might move you into a new building. It might move you into a new area. It might move you into another state. Are you ready to take the best that God has for you? Are you willing to do all that it takes to harvest the thing that God has for you? Are you willing to receive it? Because receiving the harvest, you cannot harvest in the same basket that you harvested in 2 years ago. And if you're using the same basket that you had 2 years ago to harvest the fruit of God, that means you have no growth left in you. Because a tree will always produce more fruit. Because you are a tree that is planted by the rivers of water that will always produce because it has a living well. It will always produce because it has nutrients. It has nurturing. But the tree that always produces is the tree that is always willing to be pruned and trained by God. God prunes every tree. God prunes every tree because there are undesirable branches on a healthy tree. So just because God is pruning you doesn't mean that God doesn't desire you. Just because God is pruning you doesn't mean that God doesn't love you. What God is trying to do is get you to bear more fruit. He wants you to bear more fruit. But when you bear more fruit, what God begins to bless you, are you complacent? Are you complacent? Are you unwilling to invest more money to bring in the harvest? And I think this is what is happening with the body of Christ. We are unwilling to invest more of our time, energy, and money because we say it doesn't take all of that. I'm going to tell you it takes all of this and more, because there are more people that want to hear the good news that there is a loving God that shed his blood for a dying world. There's a loving God that shed his blood for a dying world. So I challenge the people that call themselves believers. Are you willing to do what it takes to get the full harvest of God? Are you willing to study one more hour? Are you willing to pray another hour? Are you willing to fast one more day? Are you willing to speak, if that's your gift, one more time? Are you willing to dance before the Lord if that's your gift one more time? Are you willing to give money one more time? Because prayer moves heaven, but money moves the earth. I'm going to say that one more time. Prayer moves heaven, but money moves the earth. Are you willing to invest in the kingdom? Because just like the tree that I have, I now have to invest more money because it is mature. And I actually have to invest more time because the things that allow that tree to go from a sproutling to a mature tree, it is now a different set of fertilizer because it actually needs more. I actually got to do things to protect it from the beetles, the things that actually chew and harm and take away. So are you willing to defend this gospel? Are you willing to invest your all to defend the person that you call your savior. I am. If this message has blessed you, I ask that you share it. But also, if this message has blessed you, I ask you to take inventory. Are you ready for the harvest? Because the season has changed. And this is Michael Gibson, and this is why I go to church. Because the season has changed, and the harvest is coming. It's harvest time. Stay blessed, and thank you for your time.